Good afternoon, everybody. This is Jennifer Gregg, Director of Human Resources for Bay City Public Schools. I'm here today with Patrick and Shelley from the OTLT office to walk through evaluations and student growth and how that will look this school year. We know this year is difficult, and difficult may be an understatement, from learning new methods of instruction to pivoting from remote to in-person and back to remote learning, or adjusting to a virtual assignment with new platforms. We've all done something new and hard. We see you. We know how stressful this year is, and the last thing we want is to create additional stress about your evaluation this year. So this raises the question, what will evaluations look like? You're all aware that the teacher evaluations are required under Michigan state law. We were fortunate to receive a waiver for most evaluations for the 1920 school year due to an executive order issued by Governor Whitmer in April. To date, we have not seen any amendments for the 2021 school year, but we anticipate that there will be adjustments of some sort through the legislature. But since we don't know what those may be or when they may happen, we have to maintain compliance with the evaluation requirements while we wait for action to be taken. The Michigan Department of Education and several other education organizations have publicly stated that they are not in support of the evaluation process in its current form while we continue to navigate the complexities of COVID-19. The district is also aligned in this belief, which is why we are working to reframe the lens of evaluations this year to a model of support and improvement rather than focusing on performance. This has been the focus and position of the Danielson group as well, and we will be focusing our efforts this year on the most critical components of the Danielson framework that are most relevant during remote learning, which we will cover in more depth in the next few minutes. Another question that may come up is, what will student growth look like this year? Again, we have not seen any amendments passed as of yet, so we must proceed with the current legislation of student growth goals comprising 40% of the overall evaluation score. We want to maintain focus on your building and individual goals for the school year, and it will be important to identify realistic goals with your administrator for your own personal growth and the growth of your students. This year is incredibly unique, and your goals should reflect this as well. We will be including student learning objectives, or SLOs, again this year, as part of the student growth measures. Both students and educators are struggling this year, and we want your SLOs to reflect attainable growth goals while keeping in mind the upheaval and constant change we've been experiencing all year. We also have a significant amount of students that are having difficulty connecting and engaging for various different reasons. And because of this, we expect that there will also be an increase in student exemptions that will be processed for this school year. Again, we will review this process today and encourage you to continue trying to reach all of your students and engaging with them in the learning process in any way that you can. So what's next for today? For the rest of this session, we'll be revisiting familiar material, but under a new lens of the current events. We'll identify the key components of the Danielson model that we will be focusing on this year. We will review the BCPS student growth model, including the SLO and student exemption processes, and also discuss the key timelines for evaluations this year. With that, let me introduce the wonderful Shelley Ducharme.
The Danielson Group has developed a guide to continually support foundational beliefs about learning. Input from educators, along with their expertise in working with organizations, informed the development and approach within the guide. They have included recommendations for meeting student needs in a time of crisis, such as our current situation of teaching and learning during a pandemic. While COVID has forced us into a level of personalized learning, it has opened the door to an opportunity of creating even more engaging learning environments to support our students. The link to this guide can be found in our December 7th Google Classroom module. The Danielson Guide provides a few important shifts as a response to our current teaching environment. Our evaluations are still based on all 22 components. However, the focus lies on these few areas as a priority. The third edition of the framework has been under development for the last year. We know that during this time, teachers need support more than anything. While we are required to evaluate educator performance, our approach will be through a supportive lens. Included in each focus area are priorities, actions, and strategies that are aligned to the rubric language. Danielson recommends priorities that teachers should focus their time and energy. Action steps guide teachers in knowing what they can do immediately to set themselves and their students up for success. In addition, both synchronous and asynchronous strategies to engage students and their families during remote learning are included. Danielson provides additional tools to help us with remote teaching. The purpose of promoting teacher reflection and improvement remain the same as these resources provide guidance for areas of needed support. A good starting point in this process is the completion of the self-assessment and reflection protocol. The Smart Card provides an overview of each domain and corresponding components. This tool will most likely serve as a reference while you are completing your self-assessment or reflection.
You will recall from last year that the district has developed a student growth model to guide our thinking about how various student performance measures should be applied to our evaluations. While we weren't able to complete our full implementation of our student growth model due to evaluation forgiveness from the state last year, we want to follow that same model for thinking about student growth this year if it must be included. The model is fairly straightforward. Teachers are evaluated on state-provided student growth percentile scores and local teacher-provided student learning objective scores. Principals are evaluated on the results of these same measures for all students in their school, and district staff like myself, who are responsible for academics, are evaluated on data for all students in the district. Let's review the process and accountability of our student growth model that was rolled out last fall. Student growth percentiles, or SGPs, come from the state. They are only available for students and teachers with 2 or more years of state assessment data. We gather and report SGPs using Illuminate. If you have SGP data, these reports will be provided for you and will count as 20% of your year-end evaluation. Since we did not have state testing or accountability last year, the state will be looking at 3-year average up to the 2018-19 school year when calculating our percentile scores. Here is a table that illustrates how SGP scores get translated into effectiveness ratings for teachers that have data. The slides for this presentation are included as a link in the Google Classroom for your reference if you want to look back after receiving your SGP report. Please note that since there was no state assessment data to include last year, your SGP report received last year will be the same this year. For teachers with SGP scores, student learning objectives will count as the other half of the required 40% student growth portion of the evaluation. For teachers without SGP scores, student learning objectives will count as all of the required 40% student growth portion of the evaluation. The concept of SLOs is based on the premise that it is good for teachers to measure and evaluate their students' progress toward reaching course goals. They provide a mechanism for sharing what is known and unknown about students' understanding of content. They're designed to monitor student progress toward growth targets over time, and they can be reasonably used to demonstrate individual teachers' impact on student learning for evaluations. Teachers with SGP data are required to complete a minimum of 1 SLO. Teachers without SGP data are required to complete 2 SLOs in order to have multiple measures of student growth. You may recall last year that we encouraged focusing on long-range, course-long goals. Due to the pandemic and keeping with our message that less is more while trying to teach remotely, we strongly recommend choosing SLO targets that are focused on more short-range goals or targeted groups. The more specific and tangible you can make your SLOs this year, the better. Let's review what an SLO cycle looks like. An SLO is a 3-phase process that involves an interaction between principal and teachers during each phase. In the diagram shown, each circle represents an action needed to be taken by the teacher, and each line or arrow represents an action that is needed to be taken by the principal. Phase 1 of an SLO is when we develop the idea for what learning will be measured and reported as part of the process. You'll recall from last fall that there is a template for step 1 that needs to be submitted to your evaluating principal for either approval or request for modifications. Phase 2 involves establishing growth targets for individual students based on the collection of baseline data. For example, if my SLO involves analysis of IXL data, during this phase, I would record each of my targeted student scores and set a growth target for where I wanted each one of them to be based on my understanding of their current abilities. Phase 2 of an SLO is complete once the teacher has submitted and received approval from the evaluating principal on each student growth target. To standardize performance across the SLOs, we ask that all growth measures be mapped onto a 1 through 4 scale where 3 indicates that the student is proficient at achieving the targeted learning learning goal. While we still encourage teachers to choose growth targets for each student that are both rigorous and reasonable, we fully acknowledge and understand that current circumstances may require increased emphasis on being reasonable more than rigorous, as several individual factors can be taken into account this year. For example, if a student demonstrated baseline score in your SLO measure of 2, it would be reasonable and rigorous to set a goal for that student to make it to a level 3 by the end of the SLO cycle. As shown in this table, baseline data and growth goals for each student in your targeted group will need to be recorded and illuminate DNA as part of your SLO cycle. Evaluating principals will review and approve or request more information about the data that you have submitted. Once growth targets have been approved, it's time to move on to phase 3, teaching, measuring, and recording growth in Illuminate DNA using the same standardized scores. We encourage adding as many measurements of student growth as necessary to demonstrate that each student has met their individual targets. But we do ask for a minimum of at least 2 measures after the baseline assessment to ensure a standard use of multiple measures. As an example, here's a table showing 6 students. You'll see we have captured their standardized score for baseline, target, and 2 additional assessments. Of the 6 students in this example, 5 have met their target. Another way of saying this is that 83% of students have met their target goal. Evaluation ratings will be based on the percentage of students targeted who met or exceeded their growth scores that you set for them. In this example, since 83% of students met their target, this individual will receive a highly effective rating for their SLO. Keep in mind that students can be excluded from calculation and SLO scores for a variety of factors that are outside our control. This year, more than any in my memory as an educator, there are a lot of factors outside our control. If you have students in a targeted group that you believe should be excluded from calculations in your SLO, please submit an exclusion request form to your building administrator for review and approval. Our timeline for SLOs start today. We ask the teachers submit their completed SLO templates to their evaluating principal for approval by the end of day December 16th so that he or she can get approval back to you by January 15th. The last day for approving student exclusions is May 1st, but we encourage conversations about exclusions to occur much sooner if possible. And all data related to each SLO should be in Illuminate no later than May 7th so the final reports for evaluations can be completed before the end of the school year. Of course, the district timeline is provided only as a guide. Building principals may need to adjust for special circumstances on their own. This concludes our presentation on evaluations for the 2020-2021 school year. As shared by Jen Grigg at the start of the video, we see you and we appreciate all that you do for our students each and every day. If anything changes at the state level related to evaluations, we'll be sure to let you know. Until then, we look forward to supporting you through this process.